Hello there, welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project today. Today I'll be showing you how I made the ivory/off-white 1940s evening gown from my last lookbook video, the Film Noir lookbook, which I will put a card up to here now, just in case you missed it somehow. Sometimes YouTube doesn't like to show the videos I spend the most time on to people. It's a nice quirk of the system. I ended up making a few different evening gowns in the end for that video, but let's go ahead and jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom and get started with this one. Alright, today I'll begin with some alphanumeric paper here, of course, and my all-in-one sleeve bodice block front and back, so I can go ahead and make this little evening gown. I'm going to start by tracing a copy of the front here. Try and always remember to do this with marker, but sometimes I do forget. And I do end up with washable marker all over my hands doing this, which is a little bit more risky when using an white or ivory fabric like I will be using today. But here I am just tracing a copy of this, transferring over the dart marks, dart indications, and the apex, of course, as well. And then I can start changing this basic style into the one I have sketched up here. So I'm just going to lower the neckline about 1/4 of an inch from my block. I could have kept this up closer to the neck in the end, but here I'm kind of making some design decisions on the fly with this dress, honestly. I did things a little bit differently than in the end, than I'm intending here right now at the start, so we'll see how it goes. I'm just going to go ahead and move this dart, though, to start with here. So I have this dart here into the waist. I'm going to connect a new dart line up into the shoulder seam, and I'm going to put 2 up there, I think, here. Let's do that. And I have to do some stuff to the sleeve as well, so I'm actually going to come up about, I think I end up coming about 1 inch up from the end of the sleeve there, just to kind of straighten off that shoulder seam a little bit more, and it gives me plenty of room to wear this with big shoulder pads if I want to, and you know, for 40s things that's always nice. I did want to grab my pattern and put the shoulder line indication in here so I know kind of how long I want to make my sleeve as well. I end up adding another 2 inches onto my standard sleeve length here. And then down here, I'm going to go ahead and lower this a little bit and curve it into the side seam. So this is a little bit of a change from the normal shape of my all-in-one sleeve pattern, but you can play with this as much as you want. You can lower this all the way down to the waist if you want to. So I'm just coming down about 1 inch and curving that into the waist seam in a little bit of a more obtuse kind of curve than normal. I guess it's less of a right angle than the standard all-in-one block one is on here. Go ahead and cut this out so I have room to work on my slashing and spreading of the darts. You can see I did add a 1/2 inch along the center front here as well. That's because I want to add a center front seam up here, because I'm going to have a little slit at the neckline, and so I need a center front seam. Now unfortunately here I have drawn my dart to the apex, but you can't really see that. So I have drawn that dart in all the way up to the apex, and then these lines down to the apex, so I can swing these closed from here. It looks like I just drew in my dart and forgot about the apex, but I promise it's drawn, the dart legs were drawn up to the apex, so that all of this will work no problemo. I can go ahead and cut off the excess there, and now my dart fullness has been moved up into the shoulder seam, so I could use these as 2 darts. I end up using them as tucks today, so you'll see how I do that, kind of like little pleated tucks, and I even did some top stitching on them, so we shall cross that bridge when we get to the sewing. But here I am just splitting the fullness into those 2 darts that we opened up basically up here, and taping everything down. And then I can fold this fullness and cut off the excess. So I'll just go ahead and do that. For some reason I folded this with the fullness facing the shoulder instead of facing the neck. The fullness should be facing the neck, so I fold these actually in the wrong direction. But seeing as everything worked out in the end, I guess it's not too dramatic a mistake. 'Tis all fine, really. So here's my front pattern. Waist dart closed, fullness opened up into the shoulder seam, and then I'm trying to decide how long I want to open up a slit in this neckline. Just a little above the apex is what I end up choosing here. I can go ahead and set that front aside for now. And of course I need to trace a copy of my back pattern. So here I am tracing a copy of my all-in-one sleeve pattern back. Again, you can see me make this pattern from my standard blocks in my 1950s dress on a 1950s machine video. So I will put a card up to that video here for those of you who've never seen me take a standard block and turn it into one of these kimono sleeve or all-in-one sleeve styles. Alright, so now I have a copy of the back. I am just going to draw in this dart as it was, and I'm going to leave it there, no problem there. I'm going to draw in my indicator for where the center back is, where I will have a zipper go in. And now I need to make this look and match up with the front. So you're going to need to come up here on the shoulder. I didn't go as far as I did on the front for whatever reason. You know, sometimes. This was actually a looser, kind of quick and dirty project, so I do apologize. You see me down here, I'm lining up the original side seam and then tracing on the new one down here. And so now I can go ahead and connect that line up to the shoulder seam, just kind of referencing my front pattern to get the correct shape for back here. Sometimes I do things too quickly just because I've been doing this for so long now, and luckily I have faith in myself and my ability to do pattern drafting. And to do a great many things, I don't have faith in myself, but pattern drafting is one of them. Here I'm trying to decide if I want to do a slit in the back of this, and I really regret even thinking I wanted to do that, because it just meant that the back of my dress looks a little bit messy, because I couldn't really decide what I wanted to do. Did I want to just have a zipper that went all the way up? Did I want to have a slit back here with a button at the top of the neck? I couldn't decide. So here I am, kind of making a non-choice, honestly. But here, I'll just cut out the back pattern piece as well, now that it's ready to go. Look how square that is. So we have a front and we have a back. We're going to make this dress. I don't need a skirt pattern for this because I will just be using a rectangle of fabric and pleating it down and fitting it to the waist. So I will show you that when we get to it, but I'm not making a skirt pattern for this gown. Now for this project, I kind of had two fabrics choices. This here is a rayon crepe, and it's very thin, very, I don't know, like gauzy and extremely transparent. And then I had this, which is a polyester crepe, which is much thicker and like weightier and less translucent. And so unfortunately I ended up making this dress out of a polyester crepe fabric. Now this is more akin to like a 4-ply crepe, like a thicker cold rayon, only not a rayon. It's still a polyester, and that is unfortunate. Of course I don't like really working with polyester as a general rule, just because it's not very good for the environment. It's not the most comfortable to wear. So polyester is not usually my first choice, but for a rayon crepe in this weight, I've never seen one, in this color at least, heavier rayon crepes are nearly impossible to find. It's really quite difficult. And if you can, they are a little bit more expensive, but not as expensive as, say, silk crepe, which to make this dress out of silk crepe would have been $54 a yard or something like that, or like 60 bucks a yard for silk or a wool crepe. They're both quite expensive like that, so just not in my price range. Whereas a polyester crepe like this one we will be using today was, I believe, $4 a yard on Etsy. So yeah, a lot cheaper. Here I'm going to try and trace in my darts using tailor's chalk, and then quickly realize that tailor's chalk is not going to show up on this poly crepe. So I end up doing this in colored pencil, which of course is risky on this light colored fabric. You don't want any of your marks to show. Better to have something erasable. Even if you had one of those ink pens, like disappearing ink pens, that would probably be the best for this, but I did not have one laying around, so I just went with a light chartreuse colored pencil that you won't really be able to see here on camera, so I apologize for that. But these are just my bodice backs, and I'm transferring my darts onto there and pinning them as per usual. I would love to remake this dress someday out of silk crepe, but again, I think I used about 3 yards of this fabric all total, because in the end here what I'm going to do for the bodice is you'll see me grab 2 more backs and do that same thing again, because I'm going to go ahead and line the entire top of this, like self-line it in the same fabric. So that's how I finished the arms and the neckline for this. It's all just 2 layers, but I would need 3 yards at least of silk crepe, which would just be so expensive, but it would be very nice for if I ever need an actually luxurious gown. But seeing as I don't actually have anywhere to wear evening wear, I didn't go ahead and splash out this time. Here I am transferring my darts onto the fronts. However, I'm transferring them like only about halfway down towards where the dart points would be, because I'm just going to sew these shut for about 3 inches or 3 or 4 inches up here, and then use them as tucks, basically use them as pleats. So I'm going along the dart line and marking 4 inches of dart here, and then I'm just going to go ahead and connect those lines just as if I had drawn in a dart, really. So I have these little angled lines. I'm sorry it's so hard to see, but again, I was using white fabric. I didn't want to use dark lines, you know. But you can see these little markings up here. They're just like the darts, just without the points. And then I'm going to go ahead and pinch those closed, just like I would a dart, pin along those lines, and then I will just backstitch at the top and backstitch where I want them to end. And then they will be like pleats or tucks as opposed to darts, really. It's the same dart fullness, just used in a different way. Of course, with darts, you can use the fullness as a dart, as a tuck like this. Yeah, I'll just sew down here, see, this line. Or you can even gather the fullness as well. That's what I was going to try and say there before I had to cut myself off and return to what I'm actually doing on the screen, honestly. So here I am over at the 99K to go ahead and sew all those tucks in. Again, I was sewing this, I have 4 fronts here, 1 for each side for the fashion fabric and 1 for each side for the lining. Let's see what those tucks look like after they're sewn. So I have a lot of little tucks to sew here because I'm lining this thing with itself. And this fabric, honestly, is a little bit too thick and billowy to use it as a self-lining. but I didn't have anything else in stock other than that rayon crepe, which, you know, was very thin and flimsy and sad. I did end up using a very similar rayon crepe to that ivory one, that very translucent one I showed you earlier, to make the black evening gown for this lookbook. And it was not a fun sewing process. It took me about a day and a half to make that black evening gown, and it was a struggle because that fabric was just so lightweight. It feels like a facial tissue that you could like a Kleenex, like you could just rip it at any moment if you're not careful. So not the most fun thing to work with. Not that this poly is, again, the most fun thing to work with ever either. I think like a wool crepe, or again, a rayon crepe would be my ideal fabric in life. I don't think I'm the only reproduction vintage seamstress out there who would love it if someone would just start making a proper 1940s weight, like cold rayon crepe in several different solid colors. Sometimes you'll get people who will like reproduce a print, which is fun, but I just need some like solid colors of a medium to heavy rayon crepe. Where is it? If any of you know of such a fabric, do leave me a link to this in the comments, because I would be so happy to find out it exists, honestly. And here I can sew the darts on the backs as well. Again, I have a dart for each of the 4 back pieces, 2 rights, 2 lefts, because they will again be self-lined. So I'm just sewing my darts and tying off the ends as usual. Start at the top here, sew along my colored pencil lines that I shouldn't have put there, but I did because it's me, and then off the edge and tie it shut. Okay, then I can go ahead and press those darts. You can see this time I am pressing the fullness towards the neckline like I was supposed to when I was doing the paper earlier, and didn't. I do these, the fullness is so large it's coming in contact with the neckline here, so I'm just going to trim those because it'll be self-lined and encased and no one will ever know that anyone was in here. So I'm just going to trim that extra excess off, and then I'm going to pin this down in place because I'm about to go ahead and serge all the edges of my pieces, but I want to serge the dart fullness down in place where it's supposed to be before, or while I'm serging, so that my darts are all encased in the serging that I'm using to encase the raw edges. It's a lot of using the word encased, honestly, but that's usually what I use my serger for. I very, very rarely ever use the serger to do anything other than just control the fraying at the raw edges of my pieces like this. Of course, this is not a 1940s necessarily technique, although sergers were invented. They were not home sergers at the time, really. That wasn't really a thing. Probably would use rayon seam binding or some other finishing method, use French seams, but I'm never studious enough to use French seams, let's be honest. But here I'm going to go ahead and pin this down again with glass pins, and you'll see this network of pins I'm about to lay down, this sort of pin scaffolding, just to make everything lay flat while I go in and I do some top stitching along both sides of these little seams for the tucks. This would have been better if I had a thread that perfectly matched this fabric. I kind of have natural colored thread, and then I had white thread, but I didn't have this off-white kind of almost eggshell color that the gown is actually. I kind of had pure white or a little bit darker ivory, and so the thread here I'm using is a little bit of a darker ivory color, and it's not super ideal, but I'm just putting some top stitching down next to these tucks so that they lay extra flat. You know, if you were doing something like, let's say, a day dress in a darker color and you wanted to use contrast stitching, that might be fun. But for this evening dress, I wanted it to blend in more than it ended up doing so, honestly. But here I can go ahead and sew my center fronts together for these 2 pieces. And again, I'm only going to sew up to where this pin is, so I can leave the neckline as having a bit of a slit and opening up here. So I'm just going to sew from there down to the waist, and I'll go ahead and pin that in place first. Take it over the machine and go ahead and sew that seam. Blah, 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 blah. Can you tell I recorded a different voiceover yesterday and my brain is still spaghetti? Yes, it's possible. So go ahead and press that seam open here, the center front seam. And I can do that again for the same, all over again basically, for the lining of this front as well. I'm just going to pin the top of this open with that 1/2 inch seam allowance, by the way, for now. I wasn't exactly positive how I wanted to finish the neckline at this point, so I was just leaving my options open, really. But I could go ahead and attach the backs to this and sew them at the side seams, these funny, tiny little curved side seams. They're so silly, these little guys down here on the right-hand side. That is a funny looking side seam. And the curve is so wide that I actually didn't even clip that curve down there for this, just because I was like, no one is ever going to know if this even bunches a tiny bit because it's going to be under my arm. So I didn't even clip that curve. I know, naughty. But here I am sewing that curve. Like so. Excellent. And I can go ahead and sew the straight, long shoulder seam slash sleeve seam. It's kind of both when it's an all-in-one sleeve like this. So the shoulder seam becomes your sleeve seam. It's all in one, but it's nice, long, straight seam up here. No problem. Like so. Then I can go ahead and pin on the other side. I did these one at a time for some reason. I did like the right hand side and then the left hand side or whatever. Just because I was trying to avoid getting this dirty at all, of course, as well. And like being really careful about sewing machine oil or like anything that could get on this. Because while it's polyester and therefore completely washable, I could like throw this in the washing machine. I didn't have time to wash and dry this dress before I needed to wear it, you know, for the lookbook. So I was trying to keep this as clean as possible. And I did prick myself a couple of times and I was like, don't get blood on this fabric, honestly. Although, how very film noir of me, right? Didn't want any DNA ending up in this dress. But here I am pressing my shoulder seams at least. And then I kind of give these curved side seams a little bit of a press. Again, to have these lay properly flat, you would need to clip them. But alas, I just didn't do it. This fabric has a loose enough weave that I could get away with it. So again, I allowed myself to not clip these seams. All right, so here is my fashion fabric copy, and here is my lining copy. Again, made just the exact same way. So I'm just going to lay these two together, stick one inside the other, basically, and then sew them together along the neckline. So it's basically like the same way I would do a facing, only it's a full lining, you know? I'm kind of sort of bag lining this-ish. And I realized, oh, I can go ahead and sew most of this neckline together while I do this. So I sew close down into the V, but not completely down to the point down there. I'll see if I can show that. Here I am ironing it so it will behave. Again, this was kind of a freer process, making this dress. I was kind of making decisions as I went instead of having everything set in place before I started making this. I never have like, you know, because I make my own patterns, I never have instructions for then how to make the garment. So sometimes I decide on the fly how I'm going to put it together, you know? So I'm just going to sew close down to that V for the center front slit, and then I'll sew the neckline on each side together. And then I can do some edge stitching or understitching in here as well so that curved neckline will lay properly. I do have to clip it before I do that, so you'll see all that in just a moment. I hope all of you are having a good December so far. I have had to, after the Film Noir lookbook, of course, came out late, last week was not its original premiere date. The movie got pushed back, which is, you know, a very 2020 mood, honestly. But I basically just didn't give myself enough time to edit that, so I had to take more time to finish the edit. And then I finally got the video up, and it kind of threw my schedule all into disarray. And I realized I was feeling a bit burnt out, and I didn't want to push myself any further. So I had a couple of other projects planned. I was going to jump back into the cicada project this month, and I decided, you know what, it's just going to have to wait till the new year. So I will be getting back into Victorian costuming after the holidays. I just need to give myself a little bit more of a break than I maybe even usually would. But, you know, trying to learn how to balance when working for yourself is an interesting and ongoing learning situation, honestly, because I really don't know how to take the proper amount of rest, because I never know how much rest I'm allowed to have. Because I get to decide, I feel like the answer is as little as possible to keep going, which does catch up to me. And that is something I found out at the end of last month, so this month I'm taking it a little bit easier. But you can see I just sewed all along that. Anytime I needed to go around a corner, I just left the needle down, picked up the presser foot and moved it along. But now over here I can cut my corners off and clip inside of here. I could have cut little slits in this instead of cutting the triangles out, but I wanted to remove as much bulk as possible from up here because this fabric, again, is kind of a little bit too cushy. I know I chose it because it was thicker and therefore more opaque, but it also is just a little bit too puffy, honestly. So it's like Goldilocks with fabric. I can't find the perfect crepe, you know. Talk about a non-important problem. But here I am sewing those little triangles basically down. I'm doing some understitching here on basically sewing the seam allowance down flat onto the lining side of this so that there's a tiny line of stitching on the inside lining holding that seam allowance down. It just helps when you go to iron the neckline down for everything to lay in place properly. this isn't the best illustration or tutorial on how to do neckline understitching here. Apologies. But I hope all of you are giving yourself the rest and the time off you need going into this always stressful season, but in 2020, you know, it's a little bit extra here. And I hope you're still staying safe out there and healthy out there, because we're not out of the woods yet. So here I am just going ahead and ironing this neckline, or pressing that neckline, now that I have everything sewn in there. You can see I use a knitting needle here to poke the corner of the center front properly and get that to lay nicely. Go ahead and get both of those situated, and then I can go ahead and press this real good. So I'm just going to pin it in place with glass-headed pins, so I can go ahead and press over them without to worry about melting a pin or anything like that. Sometimes you'll see me pin things to the ironing board as well. You can see that little corner at the very bottom of the V is still open, and I will just go ahead and hand stitch that stuff shut down there. Just how I decided to do it this time. Sometimes it's hard to explain why I do the things I do later on. Sometimes I watch me doing this and I'm like, why did you? Oh, well, whatever. Because I don't know why I made decisions, why past me made certain decisions, honestly. But here you can see me, I'm pinning it to the ironing board to keep everything in place, pull things taut, and then I can go ahead and give everything a nice press. Of course, with poly like this, I'm practically kind of like steaming and melting the fibers into the shape I want, which it's very malleable in some ways, but if you get too hot on that iron there, you will go ahead and melt it. So you gotta be real careful with thermoplastic fibers. The only nice thing about working with polyester, and this is a stretch, so forgive me, if polyester is basically just plastic, and most plastics are made of, like, you know, petroleum-based things, which petroleum is like, you know, old dead dinosaurs and like prehistoric plants, right? Technically, kind of. So I like to think about polyester garments being made of dinosaurs. It makes me feel a little bit more endeared to them, seeing as they will long outlive me. This dress will live far longer than I ever will, unfortunately, because it's not exactly biodegradable. I don't like using thermoplastic fibers. It's not the best. But alas, I am a human who contains multitudes, including mistakes, like thinking it's okay to use poly crepe. Is it okay to use poly crepe? Let me know in the comments below. What are we going to do about polyester, guys? You know, I am not the only one using it. Let's be honest. It's the most commonly used apparel fabric in the world. Yikes. Here I have my big rectangle. This is just a 46-inch long cut of my fabric, so it's as wide as my fabric is wide, which was about 50 inches, I think, and it's 46 inches long, so I can have a nice long hem on this. And I'm just going to pleat the center front here. I just put a couple of box pleats in. You can see they're all pinned here in place. And then for the sides of this, I kind of decided I wanted to form to my hips, and so I'm using my basic block, like pencil skirt pattern that I use anytime I draft a skirt pattern, and I'm going to lay it on top of this. You can see that green pin here, kind of in the center of the screen. Well, I'm moving everything around a lot. This is going to be really confusing. I'm so sorry. This is not going to be a great tutorial today. My apologies. It's a scatterbrained situation for me at this point, guys. I'm kind of in recovery mode. So I'm going to lay my pattern on top of this. You'll see in just a second here, if I can get my darn hand out of the way. And I'm going to trace the curve of my hips from my pattern onto this fabric. And I'm going to sew in a little curved dart at the side seam of this skirt. So here I am trying to think about where I need to put this. Just put it next to that pin, Esposito. So I'm going to lay this and copy over this curve from either from the front and from the back pattern, and end up with this little curved dart right at the side seam. Hopefully this makes any sense. I should have just made a skirt pattern, honestly. I'm just basically doing this to save myself having to sew side seams in the skirt, which I didn't have to sew side seams in the skirt, but yes, just line up your pattern with the side. It'll work. It's fine. Just go do it. Do it, Esposito. So I drew the curve in. You can see I have the waistline parallel with the waist, what will be the waist on this at least. And then I will take my back pattern and line up the side seam, but overlap it, because of course this is without seam allowance. This is so hard to explain. There's basically virtually impossible to explain. If you really liked the skirt on this dress, I'm sorry. You know, it's basically just make a column skirt. You should just use a pencil skirt pattern, make it long, and then add fullness to the front so you can do these pleats. I would have done this very differently if I was thinking properly about how the heck I was going to explain later. I can't explain myself, you know? I can't explain myself. But here I am, putting in my little curved dart. I'm so sorry. Alright, back over to the machine so I can go ahead and sew those weird little curved darts. Honestly. Here's that. Just shaping the sides of this skirt to my hips a little bit. You could just put some, you could do a skirt like this in many, many, many ways. You could just do a little bit of gathering, which is what I did on the black rayon dress for this lookbook. It's just, the skirt is just gathered a little bit on that one. That way it falls over my hips. But in this fabric, gathering would be a lot puffier, so I didn't want to do that because I wanted to retain a kind of sleek columnar, I always struggle to say this word, sort of look to this dress. It was a little bit, Grecian or a little bit ancient Egyptian inspired, which is how a lot of gowns from the 1940s in this time, late 30s, early 40s, kind of Grecian goddess, but Hollywood glam style situation. But just like all my darts, here I am tying off the end of that. And I don't even remember. I think I just pressed this fullness towards the back. I don't even remember. Clearly I made this dress in some sort of weird fever dream, honestly. Back over onto the blue patterning table of doom, I can go ahead and figure out what pleats I want to do for the back here. Honestly, again, no surprise here, that I could have, wish I would have done this a different way. That way I could have had more back here. I didn't have enough fullness to do deeper pleats like I had in the center front. So I just have these little shallow kind of 1.5 inch pleats in the back towards the center back. Obviously they're facing outwards towards the side seams, but they're just not super, super ideal. I could have gone for a deeper pleat back here. It would have made me happy. But alas, the fabric was only so wide, and since I was only using the width of the fabric, I only had so much to work with. But here I am trial and erroring that. So you can see this was a process of trial and error. Yes, 1.5 inches, fold it down, pin into place, do another one, you strange child. From that curved dart I put in the side seam, I want this back to measure 1/4 of my waist measurement because I need the back on each side to add up to half my waist measurement. Bleh. So I was trying to pleat this down to the correct size. Honestly, again, why? Why did I do it this way? Why? Anyway, here is the finished skirt. Wow, what an idea. So you can see those pleats in the center there are the center front. The rest of this nonsense is the back. You can see I'm just pressing now that dart towards the back that I put in at the side. What would be the side seam if I had properly made this skirt, honestly. And I'm deciding here, oh wait, do you know what? I'm going to do top stitching on these pleats as well, just like I did on the tucks on the bodice. So here I'm going to put in a lot of my pin scaffolding, as I'm calling it again, with these fine glass pins because I can sew over them. And I'm going to go ahead and do some top stitching on these pleats. I think I only came down like 3 inches on these, and I wish I would have come down further, honestly. Maybe down to 4 or 5, but again, hindsight, a beautiful thing. You can see I was just using Coates and Clark thread for this. I didn't have any off-white Gutermann in stock, so I just used what I had. I have a lot of this natural colored, like ivory off-white Coates and Clark thread laying around, which is polyester thread and therefore matches the dress, technically. But again, the thread is a little bit too dark for this fabric, which you'll see when I show you the close-up of this top stitching. You'll see how it could have been a better match, but oh well. I am quite pleased with how this dress looked in the end. Obviously during this like willy-nilly wild making process, I was like, how is this even going to come together? I don't know. Ay. But then when I tried it on, I was like, oh, actually, that's better than I expected. So that was nice. I'm glad many of you seem to like it as well. It's rather an angelic look for me. My worry, of course, was that even if it came out nice, it would look too bridal, which I think was not a problem, so that's nice. Here's my front pleats. I'm going to go ahead and, again, put a bajillion glass-headed pins on here so that it looks like this. And luckily I can make sense of this, but I'm going to end at these different colored pins, and all the dark blue pins are just kind of there. But here's with the top stitching finished. Again, ooh, where the back stitching is, well, you can really tell that that thread is not the same. But, oh well. Here I am, going ahead and serging the top, the waist of this skirt now that it is all arranged as I would like. Cut away some of the extra threads here so that I can go ahead and sew this skirt onto the bodice. I'm just going to sew this onto the fashion fabric layer, the outside layer of this. So I'll sew the skirt and the bodice together along there, and then I will just have the lining hang mostly free in here. I tacked it in a few places, but I did not actually fold it under and finish it super nicely in here because, again, I'm not going to wear this gown often and no one's going to see the inside but me, so I'm not going to finish it super nice. Again, if I was using $60 a yard wool crepe or silk crepe, heck yeah, I would finish it nicely. But as I've said here before on the channel, when I'm using polyester, it demotivates me to do nice finishing because I'm like, ugh, it's only ever going to be a polyester dress, and it makes me cut corners. That thought, which of course I am in control of, and I should just push past and like do things nicely, even though, ugh, it's only going to be a polyester dress. This is just a big musing on polyester, isn't it? This whole video. What are your thoughts on polyester? Let me know. But here I am sewing the skirt and the bodice together at the waist. All right, go ahead and press that open a little bit here. Like so. Then I can go ahead and line up the center backs here so that I can put in my zipper down the center back. Again, I'm about to make another kind of mistake on this because I was being wishy-washy with what I actually wanted. Again, I wasn't going to do a like slit in the back here. I don't know why I was thinking that I might. So here I am coming down a couple inches from the top of the neckline, and I should have just gone all the way to the top with this zipper because I didn't want to actually, I don't know. Again, who the heck knows? Is the this voiceover is a mess because making this dress was a mess, and so it's hard to explain why I was doing the things I did because I can't explain them to me, honestly. But hopefully the pattern drafting of this is useful if you want to know how to make this style. It's very easy to do the pattern drafting, but you know, maybe just be more divisive when it comes to sewing things. But as usual, when I put my zippers in, I do a lapped zipper and I sew my center back shut first. So I'm going to sew this all shut back here with a 1-inch seam allowance, I believe, and then I will press that open, as you can see here, like so. And then where the zipper is going to go, I only basted where the zipper will be when I'm sewing this, and so I take those stitches out after it's all nicely pressed, and then I can pin the zipper along the side here. So this right hand side here is going to be sewn right next to the zipper teeth, and then I will overlap the other side and sew it down as well. Here I am sewing the lapped side of the lapped zipper down. You can see that zipper foot a little bit better here. Just sewing that down, using the zipper foot up against the zipper teeth underneath the fabric as a guide. So I'm kind of feeling my way, pressing that zipper up next to the presser foot as I go along. And of course, every once in a while, making sure I'm not catching anything else I don't mean to be underneath, because that would be bad. And here I am using ultrafine glass-headed pins again so that I can sew over them without, you know, risking breaking my needle and stuff like that. So now my zipper is in. Thank goodness, honestly. So here I can go ahead and tuck all the nonsense in down here along the zipper on the inside. So I'm just deciding how I want to fold everything. Fold that lining in so that it will be nicely finished along the inside of the zipper. I'm going to go ahead and hand stitch this down on the inside, but of course I have to pin it all in place first. So go ahead and do that. All right, so now I can go ahead and press this, fold it in, make sure everything's all nice and straight along the zipper back here. All right, so here my lining is all pinned along the zipper on the inside there. I have the lining pinned to the waist seam a little bit in areas where I want to tack it down as well, just so the seam allowance together so it doesn't move around. And then here at the sleeves, I have turned those in on each other as well, so I can slip stitch all of that shut and it can be nicely finished along the sleeve as well. So here I am slip stitching the sleeve, like so. Just going along, taking a little bit out of one fold, and then taking a little bit out of the other fold right next to each other, so that it's basically, this is how you would close up a pillow if you were sewing a pillow, by the way. But just sewing along the hems of my sleeves, really, so they're all in one. And it is a rather pillowy look in the end anyway, so it's kind of the effect of this ivory gown. And then I just needed to hem this dress. I mean, I had to stitch the lining down to that zipper as well, which I did that off camera, as it were. But here I am just turning the hem up 1/2 inch and then 1 inch. And I don't like the way the hem looks on this dress. So this was obviously not the correct hem to use with this particular fabric. I hadn't used poly crepe before, so I had no idea how this wasn't going to work for me. I think I need to go with a narrower hem in the future, because didn't really work out in this thicker poly. But again, I'm just doing a tiny stitch into the fashion fabric and a longer stitch up into the fold there. Tiny stitch into the fashion fabric, longer stitch up into the fold, like so, all the way around for my hem. And here is my finished crepe evening gown. The hem is not hanging as nicely as I would like in this. Again, this is a textile I've never used before, so I didn't really exactly know that it was going to do this weird thing down by here by the hem. I think I'm gonna go ahead and take this down and then just hem it with a smaller hem. This is like a 1-inch hem on it, you can see, and it needs to just be smaller, I think. I'll try a 1/2 inch, and maybe even it needs to be like a 1/4 inch little tiny hem down there. I'm not really sure what's gonna lay best, so I'll have to try something else in the future. Of course, I won't need to wear this gown again anytime soon because opportunities for getting all, dolled up to this level of glam are few and far between here, especially in 2020 and even entering into 2021. But maybe I'll just get glam and lounge around the house. Thank you all as always for watching today, and I'll be back here with more vintage fashion and sewing real soon. Bye.